Welcome, Bill. Bill Gassiamas from Recovery After Stroke. Bill has been a guest on our podcast before, and he's back with talking about recovery after stroke. He has a podcast of the same name, and you'll find him on YouTube, of course. And he also has a website with lots of resources, including his 10-step recovery program. And today we'll be discussing, among many things, his latest book, which is The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Become the Best Thing That Ever Happened, or that happened. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about your journey again, and let's bring people back up to speed. It's been a long time since we interviewed. I think it was 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back, Freddie. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here. The project that got to the end of, this little time in my life was 4 years. To get the book up and running was about 4 years, but there was a 2-year research phase, and then there was 2 years of writing it.
Mhm.
The 2 years research phase came by chance, and it just so happened that you and I were attending a course, a behavioral modeling course, and we were trying to understand how to model successful behaviors in people, or a behavior that we wanted to replicate in other people. And what happened to me was I was on my podcast. I'm not sure if it was like too far into the early episodes. Maybe it was around 50 or 60 or something like that. And I noticed myself saying, I think stroke's the best thing that happened to me, to one of my guests, which was a bit of a shock because I didn't expect myself to say that. And then my guest said the same thing.
Mm.
And I just got curious. So how is it possible that something that serious can happen? And then how can it ever become the best thing that happened? And I had a bit of a hunch because I knew all the positive experiences that I had after stroke, as well as the negative ones that were stroke related. And then as a result of coming to the course that we both attended, I asked my audience, my Instagram audience, which is about 5,000 people back then, does anyone out there else think that stroke's the best thing that happened to them? And of course there was, and they said yes. So I reached out and interviewed those people, and what I found over the course of about 12 to 13 interviews, that we had a lot in common. And then a pattern started to emerge. And the pattern is what became the 10 chapters of the book, the different things that they attended to. Some of them knew that they were attending to them. Others were just instinctively going there and attending to them. And then what happened from there was I had 10 chapters that we all agreed on, so to speak, and that became the basis of the book. And then after that part of the project was finished, that started in 2019, and by 2021, it was done. Then I embarked on the long, arduous, and difficult journey for a stroke survivor to write a book. And that finished last year in 2023, and the book launched in early December of 23.
Wow. Well, I'm one of the grateful recipients of that book, and I sat down and read it from cover to cover, and I found it was very well written and very informative. It made me think. I had a challenge when I was about 33. I had a bit of a glitch, and it isn't until I read the book that I could see some similarities that I don't believe I had a stroke, but then when people have a nervous breakdown, what is it? And, or a psychotic episode or anything like that, could it be a brain aneurysm that wasn't discovered or something like that? But I could relate to the part where you couldn't tie your shoelaces. And, I've been in that situation when I was 33. So the recovery steps and the personal development aspect of the book are very powerful. And each case study you presented there, I felt really strong empathy with the people. And the common thread that I could see there was consistently sleep deprivation, obesity and bad food, bad lifestyle, and pressure. Those three things seem to be a recipe for something to take place in people's lives. And it is like a dark night of the soul and a huge reckoning. And on the other side of my incident, where I lost self confidence and self esteem and was able to get back to normal, whatever normal is, I was a different person after that as well. Um, I wouldn't compare my situation to you in any way, shape, or form for the intensity of it, but it was intense for me, and I can see a lot of the people that I've coached and counseled, whatever happens to them, it's intense for them. And I think the work you're doing is remarkable, especially the personal development of character and of will and of spirit, and the gratitude. The part you wrote on gratitude really, really hit me. I think that's a master key. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the people who I interviewed, the common themes, you picked them up in just reading a couple of pages about their story. Well, I had an hour and a half with them,
Mm,
and the similarities were way more than 10. The thing about it is the ones that I wrote about were the ones that stood out the most. But food, nutrition is probably the most important. Now, you haven't had a stroke, thankfully, and hopefully you never do. And neurological impairment, though, can happen for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of people will have been able to relate with brain fog or fatigue related to their brain, right? And they
mm,
may not have had any understanding of what that was and where it came from. And that is basically something is impacting on their ability to comprehend, to process, to use their brain properly, right? So you don't have to have had a condition like mine to know when your brain's fried, so to speak, or not working properly, right?
yeah.
So you can relate to it to a point, but then of course, people that have had a brain injury or a stroke will have like a far greater version of those symptoms. They'll have, you know, very acute and difficult sort of ways of coming to terms with what's happening to them because it's not like anything they've experienced before. Well, one of the interesting things is that we chat about it to people who haven't had any neurological issues, and they go, "Oh yeah, I've had a headache too. I was fatigued once as well, and yeah, I used to be that guy. I know what that fatigue was like, and now this is next level. Like it's it's gone into the stratosphere. It's completely different. Now that being said, it doesn't mean you can't relate. People can relate to a point. Um, so what I found was that people who intervened, one of the first things they intervened with in their recovery was food. They changed their diet. They realized that they were being unhealthy. They probably knew it all along, but they were just saying, well, it's not affecting me. They needed more sleep regardless of whether or not they wanted more sleep. But what they found was when they were sleeping more, they were getting far better results the next day and they were able to solve problems better. And then a lot of them couldn't go to work. So all of the stress that was related to waking up in the morning, making your way into traffic to get to work, making budget, meeting the deadlines, answering emails, all that went away.
Mm,
And immediately they unknowingly were attending to being less stressed.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, they had three ingredients of the 10. And then they were working on finding other ingredients to add to their recovery story. And these people are from different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicity, different country, uh, different genders, you name it. These people are very different to me, and yet we had so much in common. And that was the most astounding thing. That was the most amazing thing that really made it, made me feel like I was onto something when I started to discover all the similarities.
Well, one of the things that I got from reading the book was I knew from the last interview and through meeting you and knowing you, but it brought it back home the incredible train smash, like how catastrophic and serious a stroke is. You were out of action for several years. You lost mobility, normal functions that people take for granted, and you had to claw your way back to some semblance of a new future, because your old life, the way it was, could never come back the way it was. It just wasn't there anymore, and how you gain new friends, lost old ones, the global transformation that this whole process did. And it was the same for the other people that you put in the book, that how their life became so different, and even their characters and personalities shifted. So I don't give people some indication of the intensity of what you went through would be helpful to our listeners to know it wasn't a walk in the park.
Yeah. And it's not something I would recommend, right? So one of the first things that happened when I wrote the title of the book, I posted about it on YouTube, and somebody commented like, how could you be recommending stroke as something positive to experience? And it's like, dude, I'm not recommending stroke as something positive to experience. There's a lot of things we can get out of it. And even though it challenges you, you can have some growth from that, right? I call it post-traumatic growth. It's a topic that's starting to be discussed. There is a field that's starting to be researched called post-traumatic growth. Now, and it's kind of the opposite to PTSD, right? It's kind of the opposite of that. Now, what happened with me is the stroke symptoms came on suddenly. It took me a week to go to hospital, but once I went to hospital and was diagnosed, everything about my life, my identity was challenged like that day immediately, because I went from being somebody who was working for myself way too many hours, maybe, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours a day.
Are you listening, people?
I went, I was 6 days a week. I wasn't doing anything that I enjoyed doing. I was cranky at home. I was being all these things. I had a really negative mindset. Everything was hard. Nothing could be solved. All the problems in the world that existed, were all falling on my shoulders. It was terrible, right? I was positive, outwardly positive. If you met me, you would have thought that I was a really positive guy, but it was just a facade. Inwardly, I was scared. I was afraid. I was incapable. I didn't have the resources. So when you end up in hospital and you've told yourself the whole story of, I can't grow my business out of my backyard, garage, shed, office kind of setup. And then you end up in hospital, and then you're running your business from your hospital bed with your laptop. Immediately, that is starting to challenge my story, my mindset. And I had this massive aha moment. I'm in the hospital for 7 days waiting to get results on what the bleed on my brain is all about. How did it come about? What is causing it? How are they going to help me to resolve it? And the first thing I realized was, you idiot, you're running your business from your hospital bed, and you're supposed to have something wrong with your brain. What was with all this story that you can't grow your business, you can't solve the problems that the business has, that it's not a business that you can run from your garden shed, which of course was just a load of crap in 2012. It wasn't real. People were, like they did in COVID, running entire corporations from, the garden shed. And I just thought it wasn't possible for me to do that. And that first thing that happened was like the big aha moment. And it was the time where I started to question everything. I couldn't go back to work for 6 weeks minimum. I couldn't drive. I wasn't allowed to do anything. Doctors said to me, go home and put your life on pause, as if there's nothing else that you need to do from now on. Now, of course, I didn't listen to them. I went back to work. I tried to go back within around the 6 week period. And the doctors knew better, because when I went back to work, that one time I went to work, I had some guys that worked with me pick me up and take me to work. I had another bleed in the brain. And then, you know, the and then it was on for young and old. And then there was no getting around it. You're staying home, you're not driving, you're resting, you're doing all these things. So my identity went from busy, minimum 6 days a week, interacting with my family and friends in a certain way that I had been used to for 37 years, to now not being able to remember who came to visit me, not being able to finish a sentence, type an email, uh, you name it, all sorts of neurological issues. And it wasn't going to fix by me going back to my old patterns and my old behaviors. I had to adopt new patterns. I had to adapt, adjust, and I had massive problems to solve. And these problems were real problems. The ones before were just imagined. They were just me making up bullshit stories in my head about why I couldn't do certain things. Now I actually couldn't do these things. And now I had this massive contrast between me literally 6 weeks ago and me now. And it's like, shit, what do I do now?
Yeah. Well, um, I think some stroke people end up left side paralyzed, face issues, eye twitches, limitations and glitches from the stroke. My father had a stroke, and it left him uh, with the loss of the use of his left hand. He couldn't do much with his left hand at all. And what deficits did you have around the time, and that you've been able to get back? Because I know you were talking about the toilet roll holder and that guy who wasn't able to
Yeah.
pick it up.
Yeah. Ivan had, well, somebody I met in rehab, and he couldn't use the one side of his body, so much so that he couldn't pick up an empty toilet roll. Like, it was a real problem. I, uh, I had invisible deficits for the most part. So when my journey started in Feb 2012, it took almost 2.5 years to get to surgery. So November 2014, I got to brain surgery.
Wow.
And when I went into brain surgery, I had all my functions. Everything was fine as
Mhm.
far as my arms and legs and all that kind of stuff goes. But then when I wake up from the brain surgery, obviously getting into the part of the brain where the burst blood vessel was, in order to retract it, they had to, I don't know, mess up some of the other parts of my brain. And I woke up and I wasn't able to walk and use my left side at all. So I was in a wheelchair for about a month and a bit, and I was trying to get back on my feet because I had an issue with my leg didn't know that it was on the ground, and my left arm didn't know where it existed in space. It's called proprioception issue there. Right? It's a neurofeedback loop
Mm.
was damaged, and it wasn't giving feedback to my brain that it was on the leg. So my leg would continue to collapse, and my left arm had lost its coordination, so I couldn't bring it to my nose, for example, and it was difficult to open and close it. I didn't understand how tightly I was holding onto things. So I often would drop things out of my left hand if I was holding something with it. And my balance was off. I couldn't walk straight or feel comfortable walking on my own. And I had to learn how to get all those functions back. And over time, all the neurological deficits, the brain fog, the fatigue, um, the personality changes were there as well. Like during that time, you become kind of cranky, and it's not, I wasn't angry at the world, but like you have mood dysregulation. So overly emotional, like really angry, and not all the time, just every so often. You fly off the handle at something that was very minor, and you cry at something that really normally you wouldn't cry to. Um, and it was just a whole bunch of things. I mean, there were so many that
Mm.
at times it can feel really overwhelming. But what you find is that if you focus on something that's big, so say my my focus was to get my walking back, but it wasn't to get it back to look like it did before that. So that was what was really important. Like, I wasn't expecting it to be 100% the way that it was before. I just wanted to be able to be on my feet and do something that resembled walking, which I do quite well now. And then in order to take that to the next level, somebody said to me, "What else do you want to achieve with your rehab?" And I said, "I'd like to run, but not marathons. I don't want to run playing soccer anymore, but I want to be able to run so I can get off the road if there's a car coming." That's it. That was my goal. So I had big goals and I had medium goals, but what I didn't have on my goals was deadlines, and I celebrated the small wins. So I really made sure that I paid attention to what I had achieved rather than how far I've got to go to the goal. And
Is it sort of like goal setting is an interesting thing. I think in a lot of cases, goal setting can be depressing. You set all these goals and you don't get them or whatever. I like to set what I call outcomes, and outcomes that they always say time related, time related. But if you're
yeah,
headed in a direction towards an outcome, it's not the destination in life, really. It's the journey of all the discoveries and growth and stretching that takes to get this outcome. And I, I'm even impressed from the first time I've met you. Your demeanor has changed even since I've known you. Um, I've noticed your mannerisms, your speech has become more articulate. And I think optimism is such a powerful tool in all our lives, especially for stroke victims, if they could garnish some optimism. And especially, I've watched quite a few of your interviews on your podcast because I subscribe to your channel. And sometimes listening to those stories, I get a bit teary, and I can identify with a lot of the struggle, like search for self, search for meaning, search for purpose. Purpose is such a strong driver, and it's not that poster you said, who can I become? It's up on my wall.
mm, mm,
I got it from the book. Who can I become? And it's not what can I become, but who.
mm,
Because in
mm.
the process of any journeying of self-discovery, self-healing, there's an evolving, a becoming, and you know, just your heart to reach out to others. You're suffering. You've got empathy and compassion beyond anywhere you could have imagined prior to these incidences.
Yeah. One of the things it does immediately is when you're not able to function like your previous self, is you start to sympathize and empathize really quickly with other people who are in that situation permanently, because they weren't always like that. They were, quote unquote, normal before their incident, whatever happened to them. So yeah, you start to realize, oh, okay, the person in the wheelchair is not just sitting down, because that's the extent that I saw it. It was like, life can't be that bad. They probably just, can't use their legs and they're sitting down. I mean, it sounds so naive, but that's how naive I was. And you don't understand that what's going on under that person's skin is emotional trouble, psychological trouble, um, physical trouble. Like there's so much going on there. You just don't get it, right? Because you never experienced it. You don't know. And I never had anyone in my life who was permanently in a wheelchair or disabled in any way that I knew. There's plenty of people now, but I didn't know then. And it's like, okay. What now? All of a sudden, not only do I have to deal with recovery from stroke, I have to actually work on my emotional problems from the past. And I have to actually like take some action, not just say that I'm going to do something. I have to actually do the thing that I need to do to get better. One of the worst things that happened to me, listen to this, right? One of the worst things that happened to me is one of my friends, Louise Gilbert, who I wrote about in the book. She gets an acknowledgement at the back as well, I believe. Um, before she was my friend, I sought her out to be my coach, my life coach. And it was
Right.
just after I'd become unwell. And and she won't mind if I call her a bitch. That bitch made me stop drinking soft drink. In Australia, there's soft drinks. In the United States, there's sodas, right? And she said, I will not work with you unless you stop drinking sodas and
I
soft
love the
drinks.
beach.
And I'm like, what do you mean? How I'm paying you? You should work with me because I'm paying you. She said, no, I won't. That one thing that she did to me made me feel so much better that then I embarked on the rest of the journey, which was what else can I stop doing that I'm ingesting that's going to make me feel better? And there and there's a whole chapter about that. Like chapter 6 becomes food for thought, right? It gets called food for thought. And that chapter became possible because somebody challenged me on something that I thought I was doing correct for 37 years. And I used to drink 2, 3 cans of Coke a day, no problem.
There's a stroke or a heart attack in the making for anybody.
Right. It's, I was creating the environment for this thing to burst or bleed, right?
Yeah.
Even though I was born with it and it may have bled at some point regardless. I certainly wasn't reducing the chances of it bleeding. I was increasing the chance of bleeding. And if I wanted to go on this recovery journey and get better and make sure that I didn't cause another stroke again, well, I had to actually make the changes, not just buy the membership and then not go to the gym. I had to actually go to the gym. So that was my whole life after stroke. It was, that's the next thing I have to do. Okay, work out what it is and then how I'm going to implement it and then go and do it. Find a way to make it happen. And and that um and then when you do compare yourself with the old Bill to the new Bill, it's like, who is this person? They're a completely
Yeah.
different person, physically, emotionally, mentally. Um, and then you kind of like who you are, and you kind of get addicted to the new feelings of greatness, amazingness, fabulousness that you feel and that you experience from all the things that you've overcome, learnt, let go of, um, or stepped into, and then anything's possible, like really. And then you look back one day and you go, I think stroke's the best thing that happened to me. Wow.
Wow. Last, not the Christmas that's gone by, but the Christmas before, I'd say that would be 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting year in 22. I sprained my ankle really bad, a serious sprain. And then I hobbled around um, Thailand for 3.5 weeks. And then I come home and got something that looked like COVID. It may or may not have been, but boy, I nearly died. I was really, really, really sick. And I got out to 92 kilo.
Mm.
And what it was is I was dragging my sorry ass through life and I was a little bit melancholy because my daughter was unwell that year as well, really seriously unwell and in hospital. And just a culmination of things had got me down and my attention off myself. But I was doing my life the way I'd always done it. Well, I went to the doctors and they read the litany act of me, diabetes 2, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, fatty liver, scarred liver tissue, coronary, wanted to put me on statins, metformin, insulin. I said, you're not touching me. I went away and sorted it out. Took me about 3 to 4 months. And I come back and I got from 92 down to 78. Well, I'm now at 73 and I'm doing well and I've
Yeah.
beaten all those things. But who can I become? I'm not the same drivers, the same motivations, the same worldview is gone, never to return. I can't go back because once the mind is expanded, it can't contract. It can't unlearn what it's learned. And I'd say the same in your case, the neuroplasticity of your brain. This is what a lot of people don't realize is even if you've suffered some brain damage and parts are missing, there's great potentiality of the brain to compensate and grow new pathways and take over. And I know there's stories of people with only half a brain that are geniuses and creating magic in the world.
Yeah,
So yeah,
physically half a brain, not like
yeah,
my brother, who I call half brained or brainless or anything, like actually born and one lobe, one whole half of their brain was missing. And nobody knew until they did a scan for something completely separate. And then they thought, oh, hang on a sec, mate, you're missing half a brain. How are you functioning? And that's what's really cool about the brain is it is very adaptable. Now, there is a little bit of a challenge for some people who are injured to an extent that is kind of like more catastrophic, and that there's far more damage. And then therefore they have a lot more to try and get back.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there's, where do you start, and how much time do you have, and how many resources do you have? And maybe some of that stuff is not possible to get back. That being said, chapter 4, Rewiring the Brain, does talk about neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is something that we do whether we know it or not. And it's got a little dark side to it, neuroplasticity. Because if you were a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and then something went wrong, and your ankle, and then you had an a massive ankle injury, and at the same time your dog tripped over and broke its tail, and then your favorite uh, cafe shut while you were going to the cafe with your dog on the day that it tripped over. Um, and then you started to get yourself into a loop of negative thought about why you should never go out ever again.
Got it.
What you're
Anchors.
doing is you're implementing a new neural pathway. And if you practice that, neuroplasticity is going to make it stick.
Yep.
And that is some of the challenge that we face. Some doctors, believe it or not, will say to stroke survivors, you're probably not going to walk again. Or they'll say, oh, this is as far as recovery goes. After 12 months, you're not going to get any better. And it's like, but words are powerful. Be careful what you say, because there's a possibility that that stroke survivor, in a time where they are lacking energy, resources, motivation, etc., might take that to heart, and they might implement a new neural pathway that says they're not going to get better ever, and then they don't.
I
Uh,
interviewed Marvin about wellness languaging, and he was saying it was remarkable how words contour and shape our condition. And when we talk, our self-talk, talk in front of others, doctors talking in front of patients. I remember when I was in the hospital and I was unwell when I was 33, the doctor said, "Your son, he read a litany of diagnoses, which none of them were true, but I was told I was paranoid schizophrenic, bipolar disorder, manic depressive, a whole lot of diagnoses they threw at me. Your son will be here for another, he'll be dead in 5 years. He'll never be well, and he'll be on medication for the rest of his life. Well, stuff you, doc. I jumped the fence and ran away, and I'm fine. I got
yeah,
a I got a certificate of sanity when I was 34, and I haven't looked back. But
yeah.
it was 3 years of hardship for me in that hospital, and I think unfair optimism is not fair to people, like saying they're going to do things that they couldn't do before. Like the fellow broke his finger and he says to the doctor, he says, "Do you think I'll still be able to play piano?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "That's strange. I couldn't play it before."
That's the best. I love that one. Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah,
don't want
unfair optimism.
to.
But, it is optimistic to say to people, look up, move forward, see what you can grab. I've said to a lot of people, look, desire is a wonderful thing. It's attachment that's the problem. What do I mean by that? If you take something here and it's pried out of your hand, it's gone. But if you let it go here, it's still there. Like, reach out for things. And if you learn to handle disappointment, but reach out for things. And I think in your case, I've watched you reach out for so much since I've known you, and I see you still reaching out for more. But it's not in a greedy or ambitious way. It's just more in an optimism way of what are the potentials of where I am now. That's how I see you. What are the potentials of what lay in front of me, especially with building your podcast. How many interviews have you done now? What, a
We're
couple
probably at
hundred?
about 290 now.
Wow. And they just show up and people contact you of their own volition and they
Every day.
find you
Every
every
day I
day.
get emails from somebody commenting about how that episode was the right one for them, how they needed that episode, how they shared that episode, or how they want to be on the podcast. Now I get more guests coming onto the podcast than anything. Is like, it's ridiculous. I used to have to chase people. Now they're chasing me. But as far as me, I did do exactly what you said. I went after all the solutions. I had a lot of problems, and I knew there were solutions to them, and I tackled them one at a time. Like with my nutrition, I didn't just stop eating all the bad foods all at once. I did them slowly. So the first thing I cut out was alcohol. That was pretty easy to do. Well, before that was smoking, right? And then alcohol, and then gluten, and then dairy, and then caffeine. Now I do drink coffee now. Dairy is a really difficult one because being from a Greek background, uh, and so is gluten. Like all dairies are delivered to you on a piece of bread. So like it's food that we've been raised on, and it's so hard, but I do avoid it because when I eat gluten, um, I have like what's it called? I have brain fog and fatigue. But when people go into food coma, if I have any types of processed grains like pasta or bread, I notice a real massive dump of energy and slump in my ability later on, like within about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm a write off. And you know, it's not when I'm a write off, it's not I'll be right in a little while, it'll be okay, which is true. It reminds me of how I was after the stroke for a long, long time that I couldn't change. And I don't like being there. It's no fun. I can't rest comfortably knowing that it's going to be over in 2 hours because it makes me feel so bad and it takes me back to that time. And I don't want to experience that. That's why also I don't drink, because when I drink now, my left side, which is the affected side, goes numb almost after one and a half, like one drink, half a drink. By one and a half drinks, I feel drunk on my left side and my right side's still ready to go. So my left side makes me feel again like I'm having a stroke again. So it's like, I don't like that feeling. I'm not going to do that anymore. There's,
Wow.
there's also a lot of medical reasons I shouldn't drink because, alcohol impacts the brain negatively after you've had a stroke. The last thing you want to do is find more things that impact the brain negatively. Um, so I make a concerted effort to solve problems, find new ways of being myself, enjoying new ways of being myself, finding new ways to interact with people so that I'm not just interacting with them over an alcoholic drink at the pub. Uh, there is a lot of things that I can do to live a really cool, awesome life that I didn't know was possible before because I was so narrow-minded. I was so fixed in my mindset that I couldn't see any possible um, solutions. Now, our friend Marvin, who was the person whose course I was at and developed the model, um, was also the first person who I bumped into way back when in one of the courses that I did, the M-braining course, which kind of opened up my ability to connect to my emotional side. Because when my brain switched off, my emotions came to the fore, but they came in a bang. And I was, like I said, overly emotional, angry, and circulating between the two, like really ridiculously, like I was some kind of state of bipolar. And I had to find a way to deal with this thing that I found in my chest, which was called a heart, by the way. Like I hadn't known that I had a heart in my chest to the extent that I became aware of it after the stroke because it came forward and expressed itself. And I hadn't allowed that to happen much. Now, I was warm to my children and I had compassionate and heartful moments, but it wasn't my default. My default was head based. It was about,
Mm.
I'll work everything out with my head. And what's interesting is like, this is in my first chapter, in the mindset chapter, there's a quote by Stephen Hawking, the physicist who was completely disabled because of motor neurons disease when he was 23, I think, or 21. And it says, do not be disabled in spirit as well as physically. And I think that that's kind of the the philosophy that I applied to my recovery, because without knowing about this quote, and that's because being disabled in spirit, I felt was far, far harder to stay in that space than being disabled physically. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time disabled physically, a month and a bit in a wheelchair. So, like, I'm not saying that I have that level of understanding of disability. I don't. I have a very small level of it. But I felt like the way that I was impacting my life negatively was all spiritually. And that was messing my relationships up, my business, my enjoyment, my ability to experience fun things, to plan for them, like all sorts of strange stuff that I used to stop myself doing because I don't know, because I was afraid to do them, I think, to be honest.
Your personal journey, your spiritual journey is very comprehensible, very understandable. Like I work as a coach and a counselor, and I work with people who are been hardened alcoholics and ice addicts and all sorts of injury to their life. And I can really identify what you're saying. My life passion is to expand consciousness and awareness in myself and others. So in our journey through life, it's facing it's almost like shadow work. You know, you're facing that dark side of the moon within yourself, and all this has brought a lot of things to the forefront to you, like a mirror. And you see yourself clearly, and you go, "Oh my God!" Because you're forced to sit. You can't go to work. You're forced to sit with yourself and look at what's going on.
Mm.
And then
Mhm.
your conscious mind goes, "Oh my God, I can see the pathway that got me here. And I can see half my problems were self-induced." I said to one young lady on the weekend who was talking to me about her anxiety and depression, I just said to her, I said, "You think the battle's out there? You're talking about all these circumstances." I said, "The battle's between here. It's all inside. And that's a
Mm.
manifestation of what's inside." And she just looked at me like this, like the penny had dropped, and goes, "Oh my God." And I said, "Yeah, get still, get a journal, start writing it down, and
Mm.
you'll be able to do algebra on a lot of it, and it'll disappear." You know, and I I really I feel such incredible connection with your journey, with your spirit, with your yearning, and your desire to help other people, and it's commendable, Bill. It's I really hope and pray that this video that we're doing now gets out to so many people, because I think it's not just the people who've had strokes. It's also the carers or the circle of friends and influence around the people who've had strokes. So many people are just on autopilot, caught up in their own lives, their own unfoldings. And one of the reasons they don't have compassion or empathy is they just don't know. They see everything on the surface, like someone sitting in the wheelchair. They're just sitting
Mhm.
down in the wheelchair. Oh, they've got a great life. Someone's feeding them. They just can't identify with the pain and suffering because they haven't had it happen to themselves.
Mhm.
But I can see that anybody who suffers with mental illness or mental challenge, there are parallels here. There are takeaways for people from all walks of life to listen to your podcasts, to read your book, especially read your book because it's so comprehensive. The 10 steps I think could apply to anybody who wanted to improve their life. It's a good self-help book.
That's true.
Um,
The
anybody could benefit from it.
That's what I noticed, right? Is that I've got an audience, they're all stroke survivors. So
Hmm.
I can't write a book that's not about stroke survivors or stroke recovery. That's, of course, that's the reason I wrote the book, and it has the title that it has, because I'm marketing it to people that are like me, that
Yep.
relate to me, because we understand each other. But there's no doubt about it that people that have had cancer scares, people that have had heart attacks, all sorts of people who have gone through their lives and had some kind of a serious health scare could relate to all those 10 steps, because I didn't invent them. I stumbled across them and I made sense of them. But the people who I interviewed went to them instinctively. None of us reinvented anything. We were just telling a story that
Mm.
perhaps once was known and we've forgotten about. We're just retelling the story. That's all it is. And it's definitely applicable to lots of people. I want to add a couple of things to what you said earlier about that most profound understanding that person just had when you said to them, the journey, to overcoming depression and anxiety is internal, right? And it is. And there's some external factors that make depression and anxiety worse. Like, let me tell you, like your mindset, like the food that you eat, like the amount of sleep you get, like the people you hang around with.
Oh yeah,
Do you know? Like whether or not you do things for other people and support other people, whether you have a life's purpose. I've just named, I think, 7 of the chapters out of my book, right?
you have.
All these external things support that internal work
Mm.
to be able to be done. And where I think you meant that the search for answers to depression and anxiety, where they're not, is they're not being caused by external factors. They're not, well, there might be incidents that triggered something, but
Exacerbate. Yeah.
they exacerbate it, but the solutions are not out there. The solutions are here, and there's certain things that we can do to get out of our way of healing from our experience. And some of those things that we can do to get out of our way include whether you eat sugar or not, you know?
Really, really interesting. You mentioned coffee before, and I come across a guy. He's on my podcasts, which were also inspired by Marvin's course. My podcast channel. It was my project that came out of that.
Mm.
So it's been fortuitous. But I interviewed the guy Ted Hannock. He used to be the cartoon animator for The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm.
He's a health coach, and we've talked on water purification and things like that. And he alerted me to the deficits of coffee. And he said, "No, you're jacked. You're wired. You don't drink coffee." So where am I at with coffee? I never have it at home. I don't. I would have one, maybe two a week if I'm lucky, but not every week. Not every week. One coffee a fortnight probably is about what I have. Same with alcohol. I'd have about two stubbies a year, and not together. One and then maybe another one some other time. But I'm happy to leave alcohol alone for the rest of my life. I'm happy to leave coffee alone for the rest of my life. I, I haven't given them up. They've given me up. They've died of attrition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you start to, because we move towards pleasure and away from pain, when we start to see that a lot of our habits and simple pleasures were actually causing us pain, our brain rewires itself to say, why are you punching yourself in the head?
They cause us pain, but they're wrapped up in heightened levels of good emotions, right?
Yeah.
So think about it. When I catch up with my friends, I know I do this often still. It's like, let's go for a coffee. It's not let's go and have a chat. While we're having a chat, maybe we'll have a coffee. The idea is that we go for a coffee as friends and we get to bond over a coffee. But it should be we go together as friends to catch up. And
You
then what
just
we
give me a you just give me an incredible idea. When almond milk came out, I used to go for coffees because I got off the dairy. This is years and years and years ago. I used to take my own almond milk in an ice pack. And I would say to the barista, "Can you make it with this?" And he said, "What's this?" It's almond milk, right? And when I was younger and I was a vegetarian, I used to go and ask for a hamburger with a lot, but take out the meat and bacon. And now I'm thinking, because I have raw cacao with a nip of cinnamon in almond milk, I should go to the coffee shop with the raw cacao and say, "Can you make me a coffee with this?"
yeah. Well, if that works, I mean, why
And
not?
done.
Yeah.
I enjoy the raw cacao drink. It's
Yeah.
high in antioxidants and high in magnesium. I think I'd be on a winner there. So yeah, look, the whole journey of self-discovery. I mean, I bet you a pound of shilling, I bet you've learnt more about yourself since you had your stroke, more about yourself. Like in the last 5 or 10 years, you've learnt more about yourself than you did for the preceding 37 years or whatever it was when it
Yeah.
happened.
I think I didn't learn more about myself. I allowed myself to experience more life. And that was like, oh my God, that's something I've been waiting to feel, to experience, to do. I can't believe I didn't allow myself to feel, experience, or do that. And it was me just stopping myself from, I don't know, having fun or something. I don't know, like meeting cool people or, I used to walk into those training rooms and feel like a dumbass. Like I used to feel
Oh,
like I was not, that I didn't belong in those rooms, that I shouldn't have been there because the people in there, were from corporations or wherever, and that they were smarter than me, etc. I didn't feel like I was equal to every person on the planet. I felt like I was beneath most people. What I learned was that, in fact, we're all on the same kind of path and journey. Nobody knows anything, and everybody knows nothing. And it's like they're all trying to stumble their way through their own life. And when you have great rooms like the rooms that we were attending with Marvin, uh, Marvin, by the way, is Marvin Oka. When we were attending those rooms, um, the people that were turning up, didn't matter what job they had or what level they were at or how many books they'd read or what interviews they had been on or any of that, they were all trying to uncover some kind of a thing that was going to lead them to a happier, more prosperous life. Not prosperous from money side of it or any of that. Perhaps there was a little bit of that involved, but it was more to have a fulfilling life, actually. And then I started to realize that it didn't matter where you came from, everyone's the same. And then I felt equal to them. And then I have this mantra. Now, this is not a negative mantra. This is a positive mantra. And it was, I always wanted to be the dumbest person in the room, but not from the perspective of intelligence, from the perspective of on the topic that I'm learning about. I want to go in, know nothing, so that hopefully the people in the room know more than me. And I can learn not only from the person leading the training, but also from the other people in the room, right? So you walk in there as a blank book, and then when you walk out, you've got chapters of stuff that you've learned from not only the people in the training, but also the person in front of the room. And I think the facilitator, if they're a good facilitator, it's not the room that they feel is actually not about them at all. It's about the concepts that the participants get to uncover with each other while they're in the room, right?
mm.
The guy before me, before stroke, before the age of 37, doesn't appear on podcasts, doesn't write a book, doesn't learn these things, doesn't meditate, doesn't eat properly, drinks, smokes, does all these things that do not lead to a long life, a successful life, and a fulfilled life. And it certainly do not lead to being a good example to the next generation coming up. So the transformation's been remarkable. I don't recognize myself. Um, and and it needed for my brain to be switched off because of the gathering of blood clots in my head, like a massive blood clot that was in my head, to intervene and switch off the old patterns so that the new ones can be formed.
Someone, are you James Tislakis? Do you know James, the NLP fellow?
Yes, Tsakalos. Yeah, James
Yeah,
Tsakalos.
yeah,
Tsakalos.
Tislakis. Um, at one of his trainings, he said, "I'm just winging it. Everyone's just winging it. We're all winging it, right?" And that's when you look around and you make all these judgments about other people, and you realize everybody's just winging it.
Yeah.
It's such a cool statement, and that humility that you just explained of coming into the room, it's taken me a lifetime to come close to that humility because I'm now more receptive than I've ever been.
Mm, that's
And
the
I would
word. Receptive.
receptive,
Yeah.
more receptive. I'm more patient with myself. Happy to mull over one sentence in a whole day. I'm happy to go over something again instead of looking for that new toy. You know, at Christmas when the parents bring in the presents and the little kid rips it open, then grandma
Mm,
drops another one. And before you know it, there's 15 packages all over the floor and all the bits and pieces are jumbled together and the kid didn't enjoy any of it,
they're overwhelmed.
overwhelmed. And I would say for learning for me was difficult in the past because I was overwhelmed and I was in such a hurry to understand and know everything. And now I'm happy to just sit with something until I do understand it and then move on for something else. And I think your journey is remarkable, Bill. It's remarkable because I always recognize potential and I can see where you're at now. And I can see a very powerful and optimistic future, not just for um, your podcast and the way you're helping others, but you as a person in life to speak into the lives of others. I mean, do you do any public speaking?
So I do a little bit. The plan is to do a lot more of it now.
Hmm.
See, like it's going back to I didn't think I was public speaking material, right? And of course, I'm on a podcast every week or 52 weeks of every year. And it's like you've done 300 nearly podcast episodes where you're interviewing other people. Surely you can speak on a stage to other people, in that format. And
100%.
and for me, it's just about finding the now that I've overcome myself, it's about just finding the entry to that sort of space. But I have done public speaking for the Stroke Foundation. I've actually done some paid gigs. I've done some free gigs. Um, I just haven't done a lot of them because I've had
Sure.
other projects that I think were more important. The book was more important so that I can embody the stuff that I'm talking about, so that they're not just ideas in my head, so they're the things that I'm living and experiencing and getting, the benefits from, so that I can really talk about them from a space of experience rather than from a concept that might be okay for you. So I think now that I have that embodied experience, now I can share more deeply on the topics
Sure.
to a live audience.
Well, I think writing the book would have been also cathartic for
Mm.
helping you process.
Hmm.
And I know two women I know personally, they're close friends. I was talking about your book, and both of them put their hand up and said, "Is there any chance I can borrow the book off you?"
Mm.
I said, "Sure, sure. You can buy a copy or you can borrow mine." But one of them is looking after elderly parents who have both had strokes. So she's a
Mm.
carer.
Mm.
And the other one's mother died of a stroke. So she's interested too. And I think from the public speaking, I know there'd be hundreds of Rotary and Probus and service clubs that would love to hear from someone like you because they're all in the age group of where strokes are prevalent.
Yeah.
So that would be an audience that, if they haven't had a stroke themselves, there's a possibility their partner's had a stroke and they're a carer or a co-experiencer of a stroke. Because
Yeah.
I think with modern life, with what's going on, I don't think the public is aware of how there's an increase of
Oh no.
strokes.
Oh no, they're not. One in four people will have a stroke in their lifetime.
Yeah.
It
And
was
that's how old's that statistic?
uh that's fairly recent because it was one in six when I started my journey in
There you go.
2012, right? So that's a World Stroke Organization stat line.
Well, with,
Stat.
with blood clots becoming more prevalent in people's lives,
Yeah.
what's a blood clot? That's a stroke in the brain.
Yeah.
People traveling long distances, sitting down, thrombosis and stuff, it
Yeah.
can lead to a stroke. There's so many things that contribute to it with
Yeah.
lifestyle, pollutants, poisons, toxic lifestyles, the media and all the fear factors that are out there
Stress.
now.
Yeah.
stress and cortisol. I mean, really, at the end of the day, you're you are relevant. You are highly relevant, and I think more people should hear you. Hence, why I invited you back on the podcast, not just because of the book, but because of the content of you, the experience and what you've got to offer. And I would say to people who are watching this, check into some of Bill's his contact details, and his websites and social media will be in the links under this video, but I highly recommend people to search you out and subscribe and start to watch, because if they don't experience a stroke, and it's like this for most people, if it doesn't happen to them, they don't care or want to know about it. But
Mm.
when it starts happening to their wife, their husband, their parents, their children, they're going to want to know about it.
And that's the thing, right? It's happening to people of a younger age.
Yeah.
And the ones that are happening to people of a younger age are in the 80% of stroke category, which is preventable. So they're people who are having a stroke due to lifestyle factors who shouldn't, under normal circumstances, be having a stroke. And most of those are ischemic strokes. They're related to blood clots or other things in their blood vessels getting stuck somewhere up in the path and causing a blockage. So yeah, 80% of strokes are preventable. The stroke is the leading cause of disability. The leading cause of disability. That's not just in Australia. That seems to be in most of the Western world. And uh, like 20% of people who have a stroke won't make it. 60% of people who have a stroke will go back to work. So there's a lot of people who won't go back to work. The burden on society is huge. And then when you leave hospital and they patch you up and send you home, they don't have there's no book for what the hell do you do now? They just send you home with no information.
There's no follow up for recovery. There's follow up for monitoring.
There's a little bit of rehabilitation, but that once that ends, it ends. And then there's no follow up. So I believe one of the things they're missing in stroke rehabilitation after the initial acute phase, after being in hospital, I think they're missing psychological counseling as part of that journey
Yeah.
and nutritional counseling. And I'm not talking about go to your local dietitian for a diet. I'm talking about proper nutritional counseling, and then psychological counseling, which should be as important as physical therapy, where people go like I did. I spent a month in therapy for physical rehabilitation to get me on my feet again. I think a little bit added to that, like as a part of that, there should be psychological counseling because
100%.
people
I
struggle.
Most of my coaching and counseling is around nutrition. I not only advise people what's not good to have in their diet, I advise them what to put in. There's so many things missing from people's diets, which is
Yeah,
just as important of what to take out. There's what to
yeah.
take out, but there's what to put in, because people aren't getting a complete nutritional profile. They have deficits they think they can fix through supplements, but the supplements don't have a synergetic combination of working as well. And in
Mm,
some cases, people are treating through vitamins and supplements ailments that don't exist. So they're exacerbating and distorting their nutritional health profile by taking these supplements.
mm,
So there's a lot to learn there. And from a psychological aspect, 100%, 100%. You know, we require good wisdom and good instruction. And I think when I was sick a year ago and I went to the doctor, it'll be 14 months now, her very voice to me was, I'm really worried about you, your potential for a stroke.
mm,
She said, you're going to have a stroke or a heart attack. I want your levels of cholesterol and blood pressure and all the rest of it. So I immediately holistically researched the net like a scientist, and had about 50 tabs over my double screens open and pour in. I had a good background understanding of all this stuff before I got sick, but nothing like I have now. And I would say to anybody who is wanting to understand strokes, this book is powerful. It's a good inroad. And Bill, you have other resources on your website?
The website is basically where you'll go and find previous podcast episodes, all that kind of stuff. Find links to my show notes where people's other stroke survivors are happy to be contacted that people can connect with. So that's one of the big things that I've found is people have been going and connecting with other stroke survivors, and a lot of them will tell me that they've met on Zoom and all that kind of stuff, and it's awesome. So creating that community is really good.
Community, yeah.
Um, on my website, people can come along and pick up a course and learn a few things, according to me, that will help with stroke recovery. And then there's also coaching. People can come and
Hmm.
get a coaching package. And in that coaching package, I offer the service that's not offered after people go home, which is um, it's coaching, not counseling. It's not psychological coaching or anything like that. And I just give people tips and techniques to take the next step in their journey of recovery, whatever that might be for them. A lot of the times, what we're dealing with is actual stuff from the past anyway. We're not really dealing with the stroke recovery. It's getting the stuff from the past out of the way so that recovery can happen. And of course, there's some practical stuff. And sometimes I'm a good connector. I know how to connect people to resources that will help them. Um,
Yeah. And what about acclimatizing people to their new condition? It's like they've been transported from one planet to another and they arrive on this new planet ill prepared. So I guess part of your coaching would be able to help people adjust to their new circumstances. A lot of acceptance, a lot of
yeah.
reflection, a lot of um, yeah, I realize you used to be a world class tennis player, but now your identity. The biggest thing I can see from one of these strokes is a shift of identity.
Acceptance is a real difficult part of the journey because people
Yeah,
go to it in different ways and they accept certain things, other things they can't accept. But a lot of people get there. Identity issue is a big one because then what I want to do is not tell people that you've changed and that your old identity is gone. You can still be a tennis enthusiast without playing tennis.
sure, sure.
You can be a
But
tennis coach. You can be a tennis commentator. You can be all sorts of different things. You can be a volunteer at the local tennis court.
absolutely. But I guess what I'm saying, your personal identity, the way you perceive yourself,
Even
shift.
that, I don't buy into that either
Ah,
because
okay.
might be harsh and controversial or whatever, but I don't buy into it because there's no reason why you can't. Okay, the Paralympics is full of people who become world class athletes after a disability.
I get it. I
Okay.
get it.
So, if you loved sports before and if you were competitive before your disability, well, you don't have to not be competitive anymore. You don't have to not be a sports nut afterwards. Go do wheelchair basketball or wheelchair tennis. One of our greatest tennis players is Dylan Alcott. Dylan Alcott's in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times he became world's number one or something like that. How many Grand Slams he won all over the world. So it's it's true that things are different. You inhabit a different body and and you interact with the world in a slightly different way. But it's not true that you can't be yourself. I'm not saying that you're going to wake up day 2 after your hospitalization and you're going to be back to normal. No, it might take 10 years. Don't get me wrong. It might not be a quick journey to getting acclimatized in this new space or to
Mm.
reignite your love of sport or competitiveness or whatever it is. It might take 10 years, but that's a journey that you go on, and you go on it regardless of whether it's going to take 5, 6, 7, 10 years or what. I didn't get to be on your podcast after the first 1 month of being at home. It has taken me, Freddie, it has taken me since 2012 to be here in 2024.
It's 12
Okay.
years.
It's taken me 12 years. So it
Shoot.
took me 7 years to go back to work. Do you know?
Look, even I, who have good perceptions, am amazed in this interview of what you're telling me, because I can see that unless someone's experienced what you've experienced, and I'm not just saying the stroke, your whole life, what past, present, and future, to be who you are is who you are. That is your identity. And yeah, I'm corrected. I can see what you're saying, and it really resonates with me. That
It's there. It's always there. It doesn't need to be taken away. It might take a backward step. You might have to prioritize other things, right? And I'm okay with that. I got no
it
issue with it.
wobbles.
Yeah,
It wobbles.
it does. And sometimes you can't do anything. And I went through months and months of not being able to do physically a single thing. I avoided going out in public. I avoided going to family events. I even went to some family events and slept on my friends' or family members' bed because I was too exhausted to interact with them, and I recharged and I came back. And it's like, what have, what do you got to lose? We've only got one, we're only here once. Maybe you believe in something different, but as far as I'm concerned, like, you're only here once. So if you're completely incapacitated because of a physical illness that made you very unwell, you can sit there being physically incapacitated for the rest of your life if you like, or you can try and enjoy some of life and go after it. Stephen Hawking was completely disabled for the majority of his life. He was the most renowned physicist on the planet. He couldn't talk. He couldn't move. He couldn't do a single thing, couldn't move a muscle. He could blink. And as a result of that, he was able to communicate. And then because of technology, he was able to get his computer generated voice and still participate fully in his chosen profession. And he
There's a
wasn't,
perfect example. He didn't lose his identity at all.
yeah, he
Yeah.
lost the other things that he couldn't do, but he didn't lose his ability to pursue
Wow.
some kind of a passion in some way.
That's profound. Yeah, it's a great example.
You can't look at that guy and then feel sorry for yourself. You can't learn about him and then go, well, yeah, well, that's easy for Stephen Hawking to say. He was a renowned physicist. It's not easy for the guy to say, man. He couldn't move a single muscle in his body for the majority of his life. He was married twice. Like, even then, he was still getting divorced and doing shitty things to, he was living a normal life as much as possible in the state that he was in. And
Yeah.
he had flaws and he had all these things. And yet he still was renowned in his field and looked up to, and his work still persists in the field. I mean, come on, as if we're going to let stroke, no matter how severe it is, stop us for the rest of our lives forever because some idiot doctor said, well, that's the most you can expect. Come on.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 1,000%, million percent. Yeah, I'm with you. Wow.
now, that,
Bill.
now, I also want to say
Yeah.
that doesn't, I also have shit days.
Yeah. Me too.
Right? And I have days where I can't be bothered, and I have days where it's all too hard, and I have days where I'm negative and whatever. And I allow myself to have those days. I just allow myself to have them. Long as I have less of those days than the other days,
Yeah.
I'm ahead, you know? And then I just get over myself, and it's boring being on the couch anyway. And I find something more meaningful to do, more constructive. I ring somebody, I get on a podcast, uh, you know, I find a way to overcome it. It's not that I'm always the pillar of positivity. I'm not always.
I think self acceptance is a biggie. I mean, I think 2 weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be 71. And I've gotten over myself. I don't care anymore. I'm the happiest and healthiest I've ever been.
Mm.
And I I have peace and contentment. I mean, I'm not striving in my podcast anymore. I'm not striving in what I do. I get hundreds of calls from LinkedIn all the time. We can get you so many leads a week and blah, blah, blah. And I go, my dance card is full. I'm at capacity.
Mm.
Sorry, no, thank you. I don't market. I don't do any effort whatsoever to get clients, and things show up. I got contacted by a training company out of the blue on LinkedIn with 2 days' notice and did a big training in the city 2 weeks ago. Never saw it coming. They
Brilliant.
hired me, and it was good money and good day's work. You just don't know what's coming up. As long as you're optimistic and you're looking up and you're open, and like you, I'm always willing to learn and grow, and I'm starting to enter the rooms like you, just a blank piece of paper and see what I can learn, because it doesn't matter if I've been presented the information before. I mean, I've repeated so many trainings with Marvin over and over again, and I've repeated them with James over and over again and other people. I've gone back to see what I missed or see how I can sit in the room, how I can just sit there differently and see what the experience is like, to just let others have a say, let others do what they do.
It's like going back into a book that you've read before and you read it again and you find something new in it that you missed, that you weren't ready to receive at the time. That's really what life is like. Is I went back to life with a different view, with a different perspective, with different needs, and I got different things out of it. I got new friendships, I got new thoughts and ideas and concepts. And I was going to life for 37 years and not getting any of that stuff until um, something changed. And the thing that changed was my needs changed and my desires changed and my mindset changed. And maybe I was a little more desperate, but not for financial gain, for years, gaining years on the planet, because at 37, I thought maybe I wasn't going to be around. So then when you go back to life and then you really look at the pages and the chapters and you go, oh, there's something I didn't see before.
Yeah.
I wonder what that's all about. And then you open a rabbit hole and then you go down that rabbit hole and it's like, ooh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's. I had a friend say to me, "Tomorrow is my 54th birthday." This was 11 years ago. And he said, "I've been in real estate 30 years and got nothing to show for it." And he said, "No, I've been in real estate 1 year 30 times."
Hmm. Hmm.
I
So true.
It stopped me in my tracks. I thought, "Whoa, been in real estate 1 year 30 times."
It's so true. It's so life can be just so repetitive and monotonous.
And I guess when you were in that maintenance business and you're doing that, it was like dog day afternoon, like when every Groundhog Day or whatever, like
Yeah.
just going through the motions, going through the motions, going through the motions, painting this house, painting that house,
Yeah.
churning
Uh,
it out.
Yeah. And then really more so is working for the wrong people who don't take who don't value your time like they should because they're trying to hit a financial budget. And it's like, I better do that job because if I don't do that, and then it's coming from a space of lack, like a real a mindset of like, if I don't do this job today, well, I might not have another one tomorrow, so I better do this job though it's for shit money. And then while I'm doing it, resenting them, resenting myself, hating my life, and then taking it out on my family.
Imagine the vibe of the job you did,
Yeah, it's terrible.
because when I do any craft work, I come from a craftsman's background, artisan background. When I do work for people, whether it's paint or maintenance or whatever, I like dreaming I'm like Leonardo da Vinci in every paint stroke, everything I do. I take a little bit too long, but I
Mm.
charge accordingly. I make sure they get value for money. But my job's glow in the dark, and every time they say, "Oh, you're too slow," or you want, we don't want such a good job, and I say, "Oh, I'm the wrong person for the job. Then, if you don't want a good job, get someone else." Just
Yeah.
if you don't want it done properly, don't hire me. And
Yeah. And there's no satisfaction in going home and having done a half-assed job for a half-assed day's pay and then not being valued by the person who you did it for, whose problem you helped solve. And it's very hard on the soul. So there was no time for me to sit on a podcast, for example, or attend a course, or or read a book, or meet a new friend at coffee, or there was no time for that. And it's like this thing is taking so much away from my life. It is not giving me back enough to cover what it's taking away, you know?
I've got
And
an interesting question to ask you.
yeah,
Right, it just occurred to me. I couldn't wait till you finished. I
that's all
cut
right.
you off, and I'm
That's all
sorry.
right.
I don't like cutting people off, but I'm sorry. But just occurred to me, we're talking about us and how did this all impact your wife and kids?
Well, a lot. It impacted them a lot because not only did I not have any experience with how to deal with a brain that wasn't working properly, they never had an experience of they didn't have a handbook on how to deal with a father and a husband who came home with completely different needs and was completely dependent rather than independent. And they struggled. And my wife did it really tough because a lot of the stuff that was going wrong, I was taking out on her. And
Mm.
she was trying to come to terms with, is this stroke or is this him? Is this something that I did or is it something that is happening to us? Like there was a million things that she couldn't understand and comprehend. She was in the middle of raising two teens and now work, and her husband is off unwell and not being able to bring in work and be financial and all that kind of stuff. Like there's so many things that again instantly changed, and her identity was
Yeah.
taken a hammering as well because she was perhaps she might say it differently, but as far as I see her in that moment in time, she was a mother and a wife and somebody who went to work and somebody who interacted with her friends in a certain way. And all those things changed for her. The way she interacted with people changed because I couldn't interact with them the way that we used to. And she struggled. And in that time, on after the third bleed in 2014, uh, I think a week or two later, my mother-in-law passed away, her mum. So we're dealing with my third bleed. Her mum passed away, her mum's funeral, and about a week and a half later, my brain surgery. So Christine's got to deal with all of that all at the same time. And I remember after her mum's funeral, her picking me up from my last doctor's appointment at the Royal Melbourne Hospital to do all the final checks before surgery. And I've had a bit of a episode, I'll call it a seizure, not like a seizure where somebody falls over and collapses, like a seizure where the internet connection goes off, something like that, right? And you're there, but nothing's happening while we were in hospital after they gave me the all clear for surgery. And instead of going home, as we were walking to the car, we've stopped and gone back to emergency and said, we were just here for an appointment. My husband's experiencing neurological symptoms. We don't know if he's having a further bleed. So that freaked her out. They gave me the all clear after 2 or 3 hours. We've jumped back in the car, and while we're driving back to my parents where the kids were being looked after, she has to pull over because she has a meltdown in the car. Because the unknown of brain surgery and having just buried her mum is too much for anyone to deal with no previous experience. So it's so traumatic. And that's the challenge, is that it traumatizes everybody and nobody has the resources to deal with it
Yeah.
because they just don't. So we need to encourage people to seek out researchers. We need stroke survivors to put content out that is supportive and helpful. And what we need to do then is offer them grace so that they can have a meltdown, so that they can fall into a heap, so they can feel like life's shit, so they can do all that stuff. And then we can say, okay, put our metaphorical arms around them and go, okay, now that you've had some time to sort of settle down and you might feel like you're at rock bottom, now here are some resources to get you back up again.
I I wish they'd make some movies of stuff like this, that the awareness went out to the general public, because I know there's a lot of mental health awareness week where people are, there's a lot of shame and stigmatism, stigma around mental health and that. And I remember I said to my dad once, he had this mate, and I said, "Oh, your mate here is a bit stuffed in the head." My father looked at me and said, "We're all stuffed in the head." And I always admired and respected my father. He had his marbles right up to the end. He died at 97. But when he said, "We're all stuffed in the head," it was so matter of factly, it was so profound. I realized that the awarenesses you're sharing, the impact and the ripple effect of a stroke, how it impacts family, friends, relatives, children. And would you say prior to the stroke, and not just after the stroke, like 3 days later or a month or a year later, but from before the stroke ever happened to where you are now, how do you think that impacts your wife and children? Have they got more of you now? Have they got a different you that they're happier with, or would they prefer the old one back? Or what's the outcome, do you think?
They're very resilient, my family. I've apologized a lot to them, especially my kids, because I feel like some of the stuff that I was doing was probably sending them down the wrong path. And and if I did croak it, I thought, well, maybe they thought their dad was okay, but he was a bit grumpy, most of the time. And my wife, she's like she's like sickly loyal. And that means that you've got to step up and you've got to be the kind of person who deserves that loyalty. And then the
Awesome.
last 12 years have been about being able to be the better version of myself for them. And then that's all the work that I'm doing. That's all it is. It's about them. I benefit, but I hope that it rubs off on them, and it does, because I've got a great relationship with my adult kids now and my wife. And we have our ups and downs, and sometimes our downs are down, and sometimes it's hard to get out of them. But we have our ups and downs. But in the dedication in my book, it's dedicated to the stroke survivors, and it's dedicated to my family, and that overall, I hope I have set a good example.
Bill, whew, I find you're a remarkable man. I feel really touched and inspired by this interview and this conversation that we've had. It's wow. There's so much more. People out there, watch this space, watch this space. He's a cool dude, and I think that the best is yet to come with you, Bill. I really do. The best is yet to come. I never cease to be amazed by your learning, your growth, your passion, and your incredible love of gifting to others. So something that's turned your life around 180 degrees in a different direction from where you were headed before. I think you were trying to do the best for your family always, before, during, and after. But I think you've seen a much bigger picture, and you're outward looking as well as inward looking, which is real credit to you, Bill. I think we'll pull up here and we'll do this again down the track.
Anytime.
I think you've got so much to offer, and because you're on a continual journey of learning, developing, and growth, I can't wait to see what you have to bring to the table for the future. So, viewers, feel free to subscribe, ring the bell. Feel free to hit up Bill's podcast and websites, Recovery After Stroke. And I highly recommend the book for anybody, of course, who has suffered a stroke, but also carers, people who have siblings or relatives or family and friends that have had a stroke or are in the potential to have a stroke, because it's really good if you're prepared. And I think discovering afterwards, there's always a catch up. And in the meantime, the stroke victim is sitting there in an incubator, like waiting in hospital. But if there's some preparedness, if there's some awareness, maybe the severity of the stroke won't be so severe. If you recognize the signs of someone having a stroke, you can get them into treatment quicker, rather than saying, oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? Say, oh my God, he's having a stroke. Get him straight to hospital.
Yeah.
So anything you'd like to add?
No, I really just appreciate the opportunity to chat to you, Freddie. Our conversations are always deep and lovely, and I'm just grateful that I have been able to become the kind of person who can occupy this type of space. I mean, how cool is it? As if stroke wasn't the best thing that happened to me.
Yeah, well, I guess I can say the same about my hurdles and glitches. I've had a couple. I had the breakdown when I was 33, and I had the health issue last year. But they are the best thing that happened to me in a way.
Yeah, in a way.
Because I think out of everything, the common thread between yourself and me is, I think, an incredible gratitude.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm grateful. I mean, there's so much more to be grateful for that I wasn't paying attention to. And that's what it is. Is now I'm paying attention to the things that you can be grateful for. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll catch up the track.